The Grumman F6F Hellcat was the main shipboard fighter of the U.S. Navy for the last 2 years of the Pacific War. During the Gilbert and Marshall operations, the raid on Truk, in the Battle of the Philippine Sea, and at Leyte Gulf, the entire fighter complement of the fast carrier force consisted of F6Fs. At Leyte Gulf as Task Force 38, the carrier force was equipped with nearly 550 fighters, all of them Hellcats. This illustrates the astounding degree of standardization achieved in the American frontline forces, something made possible only by the vast output of U.S. industry. The F6F was ordered for the U.S. Navy after the initial shock of Allied contact with superior Japanese fighters, particularly the Mitsubishi A6M-0. As a result of the experience of combat against much higher performance machines, the F6F specification required the most powerful engine available. The prototype X6F1, a progression from the F4F Wildcat, which was then the standard fighter of the Navy, was provided with a 1,700 horsepower Wright R2600 engine. But a month later, on 26 June 1942, it was re-engined with a 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R2800. The birth of the F6F coincided almost exactly with the Great Carrier Battle of Midway, June 4th through 6th, 1942, in which its predecessor, the Grumman F4F Wildcat, played a critical role. Production F6F-3s made their first combat flights on 31 August and 1 September 1943 from the carriers Yorktown, Essex, and the light carrier Independence. The Hellcat immediately outclassed its opponents, having higher speed and rate of climb, being rugged and well armored, but at the same time very maneuverable for such a large machine, and carrying a heavy and effective armament of 6 .5-inch Browning machine guns and a large ammunition supply. The arrival of the F6Fs in late 1943, combined with the deployment of the new Essex and Independence-class carriers, gave the U.S. Pacific Fleet immediate and overwhelming air superiority wherever its fast carriers operated. A total of 2,545 Hellcats were delivered in 1943. In 1944, 6,139. And in 1945, 3,578, bringing total production to 12,272. The Hellcat was eventually credited with destroying more than 6,000 Japanese aircraft, 4,947 of these by F6Fs of the Navy carrier squadrons, 209 of the others by land-based Marine Corps F6Fs, and the remainder by Hellcats of other Allied countries. The F6F's most spectacular exploit was the destruction of more than 160 enemy aircraft in one day, 19 June 1944, in the Battle of the Philippine Sea, in an aerial massacre known grimly as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The F6F was also used extensively as a search aircraft and fighter bomber, playing a major and increasing role in strikes on Japanese warships and mercantile shipping in 1944 and 45. In this role, and for ground attack, it could carry up to 2,000 pounds of bombs or be armed with 6 5-inch rockets on underwing pylons. Its maximum speed was 376 miles per hour at an initial climb of 3,240 feet per minute. Its service ceiling was 37,500 feet and had a range of 1,090 miles. The Hellcat was prominent in 2 main battles in the Pacific, the Battle for the Philippine Sea in June of 1944 and the Battle for Leyte Gulf in October 1944. In December 1941, within hours of the destruction of the United States Pacific Battle Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Japanese forces began their assault on the Philippines. In April 1942, the Bataan Peninsula fell, and in May, General Wainwright and the bulk of the remaining U.S. and Filipino forces were forced to surrender at Corregidor. 2.5 years after the fall of Bataan, U.S. and Allied forces began the reconquest of the Philippines with major landings on the island of Leyte. In those 2.5 years, the Japanese had suffered a catalog of defeats, beginning in June 1942 with the Pacific War's most decisive battle, the Battle of Midway. At Midway, the Japanese Navy lost 4 of its 6 large aircraft carriers, the 6 which had made the devastating attack on Pearl Harbor, along with all their aircraft and many of their aircrew. This and the 3 other carrier battles in 1942, Coral Sea, Eastern Solomons, and Santa Cruz, deprived the Japanese Navy of most of its trained carrier aircrew, disastrous losses which it was never able to replace. Four months before the Leyte landings at the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Japanese fleet made its final major effort with carrier-borne aircraft to defeat the American Navy. The Imperial Japanese Navy sent 9 aircraft carriers with 473 aircraft into the battle. But their aircrew were so poorly trained and the U.S. equipment so superior that the Japanese air groups were massacred in their attacks on the U.S. fleet. Nearly 200 of their aircraft were shot down over or near Task Force 58, the fast carrier force, in a single afternoon. In addition to this, 3 Japanese carriers were sunk in the battle, and the Japanese lost nearly 500 carrier and land-based aircraft in 2 days. Of the hundreds of U.S. aircraft engaged in this great battle, only 23 were shot down, and 6 more lost operationally. Task Force 58 lost 29 aircrew and suffered 31 fatalities on the ships which were hit or near missed. In very few battles since medieval times, whether on land or at sea, have losses been so one-sided. The two-day engagement had been the largest pure carrier versus carrier battle in history and was to be the last. The immediate consequence of the Japanese defeat was the U.S. capture of the Marianas. This broke the Japanese inner line of defense and meant that American bombers based on the islands could now reach targets on Japan itself. As a result of their huge losses of aircrew in the battle, the remnants of the Japanese seaborne air groups were never again able to challenge the American fleet. And at the Leyte Gulf 4 months later, the Japanese carrier force, which had once dominated the Pacific War, was reduced to playing the role of decoy, while the primary attacking role was, of necessity, assigned to the Imperial Navy's battleships and their attendant cruisers and destroyers. As a result of the devastation of their air groups, the Japanese carriers, which at the outset of the Pacific War had been the spearhead of the Japanese offensive, were reduced by the time of the Leyte campaign to the role of decoys, and the task of making the real attacks on the U.S. invasion fleet was of necessity left to the Imperial Japanese Navy battleship and heavy cruiser forces, which were still largely intact, and to what land-based air power the Japanese could still muster. The Japanese command knew that if the Philippines were lost, then the war was also lost. They therefore drew up a desperate plan which risked their remaining surface forces, but offered them a remote chance of destroying the American invasion fleet and isolating the Allied ground forces on Leyte. Like many previous Japanese operational plans, it depended on the use of a decoy force. The Japanese carriers were now all but impotent for lack of trained aircrew, and were therefore the ships selected to play the most important decoy role. Vice Admiral Ozawa, with 4 aircraft carriers and a dozen other ships, would come down from the north and draw off the main American covering forces. Meanwhile, 2 powerful battleship forces would penetrate the central Philippines and then converge on the invasion shipping in Leyte Gulf. The southernmost of these, commanded by Rear Admiral Nishimura, would penetrate through Surigao Strait, just south of Leyte. The more powerful of the 2 battleship forces, the Central Force under the command of Vice Admiral Kurita, contained 5 battleships, including the giant Yamato and Musashi, the largest battleships in the world, 10 heavy and 2 light cruisers, and 15 destroyers. It was intended to penetrate San Bernardino Strait, sail down the coast of Samar, and fall on the American invasion fleet from the northeast. The landing forces for the Leyte operation were organized under Vice Admiral Kincaid's 7th Fleet. This consisted of 738 vessels of many different types, including a powerful force of cruisers and old slow battleships, as well as a large number of destroyers. 7th Fleet was intended to be covered and supported by U.S. 3rd Fleet under Admiral Halsey. Halsey's fleet came under Admiral Nimitz's Central Pacific Command, while the 7th Fleet came under General MacArthur's Southwest Pacific Forces. Thus, there was no overall naval commander during the campaign, which almost inevitably led to great confusion in the forthcoming battle, and in the event almost led to a strategic disaster for the Allies. Less than 10 minutes later, he received the astounding report that the 7th Fleet's escort carriers had been surprised by the Japanese main force off Samar, were under heavy attack, and that the invasion shipping in Leyte Gulf was in great danger. Seventh Fleet contained a large task group of 18 escort carriers divided into 3 task units of 6 carriers each. The main duties of these ships were the provision of combat air patrol over the Leyte beachhead and the invasion shipping ground attack on Leyte and anti-submarine patrol. They and their air groups were not trained or equipped to fight an enemy fleet. But the great battle had been joined. At about 23:10, the U.S. submarine Jalao torpedoed and sank the light cruiser Tama of Ozawa's force. This was effectively the end of the battle for Cape Igano and of the battles for Leyte Gulf. The U.S. had lost one light carrier and two escort carriers, two destroyers, and a destroyer escort. The Imperial Japanese Navy had lost one large carrier, the Zuikaku, three light carriers, three battleships including the giant Musashi, six heavy cruisers, four light cruisers, and 9 destroyers. Major General J.F.C. Fuller, in his book, The Decisive Battles of the Western World, writes of this outcome, "The Japanese fleet had effectively ceased to exist, and except by land-based aircraft, their opponents had won undisputed command of the sea." When Admiral Ozawa was questioned on the battle after the war, he replied, "After this battle, the surface forces became strictly auxiliary, so that we relied on land force, special kamikaze attack, and air power. There was no further use assigned to surface vessels with the exception of some special ships." And Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai, Navy Minister, said that he realized that the defeat at Leyte was tantamount to loss of the Philippines. As for the larger significance of the battle, he said, "I felt that this was the end." The Hellcat had played a decisive role in these battles. Production of the aircraft ended in 1945. The Hellcat had become quickly obsolete in the fast-changing world of aircraft design prompted by the war. Still, it had performed magnificently in the Pacific War. It had a right to be proud.